50% of the workforce is expecting a ethical, transparent, diverse workforce that cares about the employees' well-being. Open Salaries speaks to all of those items of diversity, transparency, and ethics, and caring for well-being. And now that we've had it in practice, I can definitely see how effective it is at all these things.
Hi, I am Sophie Vaux, and this is the Rise and Play podcast. In the show, I sit down with influential thought leaders in the gaming industry to deconstruct how they create the best teams and company cultures in order to create the best games. Speaking to hundreds of game executives in the show, I have identified recurring patterns and mistakes that we all make in our leadership journey. Do you have to go through the same hurdles and make the same mistakes to learn too? You are not alone in this journey, and hopefully, you can learn from a diverse range of seasoned leaders who already walked the talk. Every episode brings actionable insights and case studies that will help you improve your management skills, self-awareness, and empathic communication. Becoming a better leader starts with becoming a better human. Are you ready to unlock your full potential in life and business? Let's begin. So welcome to the new episode of Rise and Play, and today I'm super excited to have my guest, Matt Schembari. Matt is the CEO of Lightforge Games, and Lightforge Games is a game studio that is committed to creating a new genre of role-playing game and the collaborative storytelling RPG. Prior to founding Lightforge Games, Matt was a veteran game developer with over 20 years of experience. Matt has shipped high-profile, globally connected games to millions of players as a lead engineer at Blizzard and the director of UI at Epic Games. The reason that brought us to this episode of Rise and Play is because Matt has been visible this year at the GDC talk about not the game that he's making, although it sounds super exciting, but about how he's making their game and in which environment, about Open Salaries, that we will talk about today, and I'll link in the show notes the GDC talk. Let's get further in the conversation, starting with you, Matt. Hi, welcome to the talk today.
Hi, thank you very much. Really excited to be here, and thank you for that very warm introduction.
Let's begin with the start, because when founders or a senior director build new studios, they have a bit of a journey before they get there, and they bring a piece of themselves in building the company. So I'd like to understand more what led you to create Lightforge Games. What were you doing even before? So yes, you were working at Epic Games. What was that transition phase? And maybe what was the burning desire in you to create your own company and in the way you wanted to create it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've spent my entire life in games, really, even going back to being like a kid modding games and making websites and running pirated servers, which, I probably shouldn't admit too much for my friends. But, I went to school for computer science because I loved programming and really wanted to work in games. And so that eventually led to a career at Blizzard, where I was there for about 9 years working on the tools for StarCraft 2 and the UI for StarCraft 2 and Heroes of the Storm. Really fell in love with both of those areas, kind of like a combined passion for the art of making games when it comes to tools and the business of games when it comes to UI, because live service games in particular, their entire business model runs through the UI, all of monetization and retention and social and that kind of stuff, right? So I spent about 9 years at Blizzard working on things like that, and eventually decided that it was time to move back to the East Coast. That's where I'm from. And so I took a job at Epic, where, as you mentioned, I became the director of UI for Fortnite. And so I did that for a good couple of years. And at the same time, I'd been really falling in love with this idea of this project that had been in my head for like 10 years, right? This idea of like, how do you bring the magic of tabletop RPGs, something that, a lot of people are really passionate about. How do you bring that magic to a mainstream video game audience? Because, things like Dungeons and Dragons are, the fans who are into it are really, really passionate when they get into it. But the problem is that you kind of have to crawl over a bunch of broken glass to get there, right? It's really hard to get into. It's hard to get your friends into. It's hard to keep playing, right? And I'm the kind of person that, I loved playing it, but it was hard to keep going. And how do you make that something that can be much more accessible, much more approachable, right? So that was a big part of wanting to start the company, was solving that particular problem. I felt like it was a bit of a holy grail of gaming that, a lot of like RPGs in general in the video game space certainly get a lot of their roots from the tabletop tradition, from, Dungeons and Dragons in particular. Yet at the same time, they've drifted drifted so far away from what actually makes tabletop role-playing games fun, the social connectedness, the creativity, the flexibilities. That was a really big part of it. And the other half, as you were starting to allude to as well, was I was starting to feel this strong conviction to do better as an industry, right? As I'm looking across the industry and kind of seeing new trends when it comes to employees and what their expectations are, new trends with technology and the kind of the capabilities of how we can do things differently now. It made me ask the question of like, well, how would a company born in the year 2020, for example, how would they structure themselves? Like, what is the right way to build a company, and what is the right culture now? And so that was the other half I was really fascinated about. I had this conviction of like wanting to do something new, different, better as well. And so those two things combined, possibly in equal measure, ended up leading me to really wanting to start Lightforge.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the context, and it's very exciting to starting more from the game side, seeing the gap and solving
Yeah.
that challenge of accessibility. I do relate and agree. I'm not, I would say, a super invested tabletop player. I do like a lot the experience, but my God, the mental load to get in.
That's right. Most video games don't ask you to read 300 pages before they want you to play a game. Like that's bonkers, right? And so we've built the entire structure of our game is built so that you just hop in. Yeah.
And now it makes sense as well with your background on UI, because I can imagine a lot of those challenges being solved through the UX and UI
Yeah.
and to teach you by doing, navigating the first time user experience rather than telling and reading.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, a big focus has been on UX specifically rather than
Mhm.
UI. And I know that a lot of people, they don't necessarily always know the difference. So for any of the listeners, like UX is user experience. It's all about the full experience, right? It's not just about the buttons on the screen. It's about like, how are the characters responding to what you're doing? What is the game structure? What is the social aspect of it? Like it's the full package, right? And there is UI. And certainly we've got UI challenges that we need to solve, and UI feeds into UX a lot. And the approach that we've been taking is to keep it very, very, very simple on the UI front, which commonly is a solution that a lot of people like for good UX is simple UI. It's kind of like the Apple approach, right?
Mhm.
But the other thing too is that we want our game to be crossplay. Like I'm a big believer in crossplay. I actually led the dev effort for crossplay on Fortnite. So I'm a big believer in it. And so as soon as you say, oh, and this needs to function on a gamepad, right? A game controller, that then creates a whole another set of challenges of like, how do you make it really fast and simple? But we've taken inspiration from games like Mario Maker and The Sims and things like that, games where creation is a form of play. We've taken a lot of inspiration from that. And I've kind of banned the word tool internally. I don't want the creation aspect of the game or the GMing to ever feel like a tool, because the tools are for work, right? Games are for play. And so, we want even the act of creation to feel like play. Like I said, creation is play. And so when you're playing The Sims, for example, and you're, setting up your house and doing the terrain editing and all that, are you using tools or are you playing? I think you're playing, right? If you're in Minecraft, right, and you're running around and you're mining things and you're building houses and all that, are you using tools or are you playing? Again, I think you're playing, right? So we want to take that same perspective. That's all about play.
And that touches on already one part of the second part of your motivation of building Lightforge Games around the culture and culture of play. So one
Yeah.
core element here I hear, and more about what is a good way, or what is a 2020 way of building a company. What were,
Yeah.
the observation, the thesis you had at that time to build Lightforge Games, and in a way of working. If you could give more context about how many you are today,
Yep.
maybe the specificities of your culture at Lightforge
Yeah.
Games.
So just for the context of it, we've been around for about 3.5 years now, coming up on 4 years, starting with the 5 founders the first year. And then we grew to like 12 or 13 or 14 the second year. And then we shot way up from 14 to 34. And then now we're about 37, right? One of the things that really resonated with me at the start of the journey, like the very, very start of the journey, was this idea that, a company is really a collection of people, right? It's a group of people. And so if you're looking out, if you're starting a brand new company and you want to exist 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? You can start looking ahead and saying like, okay, well, who are the people that are in the company 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? When you look at the general workforce in the United States, at least, that's where I had the data, about 50% of all workers across all industries are millennial and Gen Z combined. right? And that trend will only continue to increase as the years go on, right? The next 5, 10, 15 years. So then you start asking questions of like, okay, well, so then who are these people, right? And what are their expectations? What do they want in a workplace? What are their skills? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Things like that, right? So when you start looking at the generational lens and what they're expecting in a workplace, I found this study early on. That was a Gallup study. They asked the question to lots of different people, what do you expect in a workplace? What is the most valuable thing that you expect in a workplace? What they found was that the number one expectation that both Gen Z and Millennial had was they expected a workplace that that looked out for their well-being, right? That was the number one thing, right? Now, Gen X and Baby Boomer also had that. They had it as a top 3 item for both of them. So you can basically say that all people want a workplace that looks out for their well-being, but you can also say that it is a top priority for Gen Z and Millennial, right? They also other things that showed up on that list, and I'm kind of forgetting right now off the top of my head the order of them, but a transparent workplace, an ethical workplace, a diverse workplace, right? Those were all type items as well for those two generations. And so the bottom line, and this is the recommendation that Gallup made, is that if you as an organization, if you're not realizing that 50% of the workforce is expecting a ethical, transparent, diverse workforce that cares about the employee's well-being, then what are you doing, right? Like this is a really critical thing. People are saying this is the most important thing. And so again, when you're kind of designing a workforce, you're thinking through the next couple of years, like how do you like manufacture and design an organization that really speaks to the expectations of the different people. And so that's where Open Salary came from in particular. That's something that I was intrigued about as it was. And I started to find a couple different like mentions of it, and I went down a deep rabbit hole of that. But Open Salary, yeah, very deep. Open Salary speaks to all of those items of diversity and transparency and ethics and caring for well-being. And now that we've had it in practice, I can definitely see how effective it is at all these things.
And so let's do here a fast forward, because I believe that 3-4 years ago, when you were thinking about it, there's been a process of trial and error. And I think it's great that you made it a topic at GDC, where usually we cover a lot of game development, but not so much those specific topics that are very tactical. So sometimes like it was,
Yeah.
I watched the talk and it was really step by step. For someone who would even consider and start today, what were the key things that you need to have in place? Maybe that you found out later by mistakes, and what was the whole process, like taking the learnings, right? If you really want to start from the beginning,
Yeah.
Open Salaries.
Well, there's two different categories of people who might be thinking about this. You've got like the decision makers, HR executives, people like that, and then you got employees, right? And they have very different kind of like roles in this. So the decision makers, right? The very first step I recommend to them is to learn, right? Read up about this, reach out to me directly. Like I do consider myself an advocate in this, and I do receive messages periodically, and I'm always happy to chat and share my insights on it, but learn a lot. Consider this a journey, right? And then you give yourself a really honest look your compensation. Give yourself a thought exercise of, if someone were to leak all of the compensation data to everyone, what would scare you about that? What would you not like about that? Right? And then fix those things. Because like, again, if you're embarrassed or scared of certain things, like the strategy of just hiding isn't really a strategy, right? That's just hoping that no one finds out. And guess what? People talk. Absolutely, people talk, right? At all levels, people talk. Anyway, so start with fixing those issues, right? Then start by expanding access, right? Maybe right now it's only like the top executives and HR who has access to all the data, right? What if you open that up to all of your directors, right? What if you open up to all your leads, right? And then what if you open it up to everybody, right? And don't stop along the journey. I like the journey because it can be methodical, but like, I think it betrays the process if you go to directors and then stop forever, right? I think you should go all the way to the end, but consider it a journey and something that can take time. It doesn't have to be, immediate, especially if you're an organization that's larger, because I totally get that this is a problem that only gets harder as you go, right? And then if you are an employee, I would say, again, it starts with education, right? Learn more about this, chat with your coworkers, and then provide the information up to the executives, to the decision makers, right? Because they may not be aware of this. Like this wasn't something I had ever considered or thought of before I started reading about it, because I just didn't realize that was an option. And then once I started reading about it and realizing, wait a minute, like there are entire countries that mandate this as a law. There are, there's major organizations like Whole Foods, right, that do this. There's big organizations like Buffer, right? So there's a lot of like success cases out there. So share those, and then also share both the business case and the kind of like ethical, fluffy case, right? Both are important. From our experience, open salary has been cheaper. That's a great thing that executives like to hear, right? It can actually be cheaper. And from our experience, it's cheaper because recruiting is very expensive. Losing people is very expensive. Retention is really important for organizations. That brain drain is really expensive. And what we've seen in our experience is that our recruiting costs are way down compared to our peers because of open salary, because we have a larger, more trusting pool of people. Nobody has negotiated once an offer letter because they know that we are open salary, because we share that in advance. We share the whole chart of the various roles as well. We let them know, okay, you're in this category here. And so there are some really good business arguments for why this is just plain better.
Hmm. I have follow-up questions on the employee side. I wonder how much employees have expectation to have open salary, or it's more, it becomes a bonus, like, oh, it's nice. And I guess it depends on the areas of the world, but I've seen some asking, I've been in places where they've been asking because they say, oh, in another place they do that, and why not for us here? But they don't really know why they want to know.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you have a view, what is the value for an employee to have
Yeah.
open salaries? And if they're
Yeah.
always aware about it.
Yeah, a couple of things. So first off, I've definitely felt that awareness has been growing over the last couple of years, probably because there's a selection bias for people who apply to us, that they, when they apply to us, they are already aware, either from going to the website or seeing some other things about us, that we do open salaries. So that awareness is definitely getting higher among folks. And I believe it will be an increasingly growing expectation over time. That's something that I challenge existing companies to be really thinking about, is that, are you prepared, other company, to be living in a world where this is an increasing expectation? I think it sends a really strong message to all employees that, that intentionality, and that they, hopefully can trust us, because, we are, doing things that are different, radical, etc. And what I've noticed is, when chatting with folks who maybe aren't the biggest beneficiaries of a salary, of a policy like this, right? Say the highest paid employees, people like that. What I've heard from them is that they really appreciate being a part of a company that does care, that is trying to do better, right? So even if they're not the beneficiary of any given policy, it does send a signal that, whatever it is that you care about, there's a higher chance that we'll also do something for you on that as well, right?
Mm. And that also leads to another part of the conversation, which I would say is more historically director level, any roles of responsibility where you are compensated for the result instead of like just what you do technically, right? So
Yeah.
when you have an open system, I could imagine as well for the leaders, it must be also a transitional journey to expose your salary. And that means also be at a level that you feel comfortable opening, because there's sometimes a very significant gap when you're on a director level,
Yep.
or if you're on a team level, and just opening it up, you will have to justify a lot what you're doing. I wonder as well, what was the journey more on the director lead side? And
Yeah.
maybe it has even dictated the way you're hiring, the type of leads you're hiring, right, to join you.
Perhaps, like I said, I do suspect there's a bit of a selection bias for the folks who want to join us. I
Mm.
think that we attract more missionaries than mercenaries, right? People who believe in the mission of the company, whether it's, something like the open salary part of the mission or the game itself, right? And that's, why people join startups a lot of the time too, is that there's something about that mission that really resonates with them. If someone's truly a mercenary and they're looking for the highest possible pay, like, you're going to get a better deal working at a mega tech company probably, right? And so there's certainly going to be a selection bias in there. But I think that with your higher paid employees, right? I guess first thing I'll say is that we do not have flat salaries by any stretch, right? Like, it's about justifying the salary for any given person, but it's not about flattening salaries. Like, we still have like a 3x, I forget the exact number right now, but like a 3x between our highest and our lowest paid employee, right? So it's a pretty big gap, right? And we do believe that things like skill and role and market, things like this play a role in someone's compensation. So some of our highest paid employees are the roles that you'd expect to be the highest paid employees, and some of our lowest paid employees are similar, right? And so I think that's a misconception a lot of people have with open salaries, like, oh, it must mean that you have to flatten everything. And no, that's not the case. It just means we have to justify, and we have to make defensible decisions for why someone gets paid more, right? Now, that said, I think that it's certainly been in my head that I've been a little bit nervous about, some of the higher paid people feeling like, oh man, I've got all this extra pressure, I guess, because I'm getting paid more to and everyone knows it. I'm not that bothered by the pressure, to be perfectly honest. Like, if you're being paid more, then you should be just justifying it, right? I don't think that the act of hiding it helps at all, right?
Mhm.
In fact, in many ways, shining a light on it actually diminishes that pressure. When we first had our first employee show up, they were seeing the gap between, say, the programmers and the artists, right? Programmers make more, and that's traditionally true at every studio. And one of the art leads, he said to me, he's like, I always knew programmers made more. He's like, but I actually thought it was a lot more. I thought they were making like 3 times what I'm making. And I think the gap was something like 20 or 40K of the annual salary. And he's like, I just thought it was so much more. It's actually really nice to hear, to see what the difference is. It wasn't nearly as bad as I had always imagined. And so I think that's a really interesting and a takeaway from the whole thing. But yeah, I mean, look, our leads and directors make more. That's part of the leveling system. And yeah, they have more responsibility and they have more experience. But we also do hold them to a high standard. And I think that what happens is with open salary is it forces you to hold people to a high standard and to deal with
Mhm.
performance issues because it's out in the open. And again, if you have high paid people in high positions who are not performing as well as you expect and hope, then why aren't you addressing that right away? Again, hiding doesn't help. And so that's kind of the whole theme of all of this is hiding doesn't help. Address the problems, address them head on, and directly. And
Mhm.
open salary really forces you to do that. It takes away that comfort blanket of like, oh, I can just hide my head, I guess, because no one knows. Like, nope, you don't have that. And so you have to deal with it. I like that actually. And yeah, it
Mhm.
stresses me out sometimes because I don't, no one wants to deal with performance issues. But at the same time, like knowing that it's an open problem that everyone can see, yeah, that's a motivator to actually solving the problem in a strong way. And so it's very helpful, I believe.
Yeah, and I can see that I really like you're living really this value through your system, and exactly it requires a lot of communication, adjustment, being uncomfortable. And what I see as well, it flips kind of things on the other side, or where leads actually have a lot of responsibility that they should really own because you can't hide. And I think it's really good because a lot of this trust, like again, when we look at things, how where the industry is going, it hasn't been open and transparent, and suddenly we just see the end result is like who was in charge and what has happened, and
Yeah.
we don't trust the leaders.
And it helps people understand things like career paths, right? Like when I
Mhm.
was kind of growing up in the industry, I didn't know what it meant to level up. I didn't know what it meant to like what the requirements were to get the next promotion. I didn't know what the salary increase meant for the next promotion, right? And so it was basically like, I guess I just do more better and I guess I'll get some higher number. And that's about as much information as I had for what it meant to get a promotion and how to get a promotion. And so here, what the more junior employees can do is they can see exactly what level everyone is and be like, oh, this other person, they're a 3.3 level, and I know what they're doing, and I know what their responsibilities are, and I'm a 2.1, and I can see what the pay gap is, and I can see kind of what that journey is and what it looks like to be a 3.3, and so they can learn from the modeling of the other person. They can ask questions. They can just like understand what it means to be promoted and what the incentives are behind it as well.
Yeah, it's very empowering. And I'll link the GDC talk because a lot of other details on how you implemented it, and you share also templates for people who are really interested in implementing it, either transitioning. Good luck with that. I could imagine how difficult it could be, or
Yeah,
starting, and contact you more about it. And for today, for the last 10 minutes we have, for me, culture is really defined by the leadership and the
yeah.
founders. The behaviors, everything you do, the way is translating into your culture. So then it comes down also to the leads, your leadership level, and how they deal exactly with an open system, and what is the system that you have built also in your culture to support your leads to grow and
Yeah.
navigate those new rules, new ways of working.
Yeah, I guess I think that the biggest one that we've done is we've instituted mandatory coaching for the entire company. And that's something that I believe very strongly in is the idea that like everyone can always grow and you can, best grow from having some kind of, coach or mentor or whatever it might be to help you on your journey, right? Help you, have someone who you can vent to, have someone you can strategize with, things like that. And so what we ended up doing was about a year ago now, we had recognized there was a need for some additional kind of like company growth things around communication and leadership and things like that. And so we ended up partnering with an organization, Pavo Navigation is their name, that does coaching, right, for startups in particular. And so we actually started with just the founders first, and then we pretty quickly expanded it to the leadership team. And then we realized, actually, wait a minute, this is really valuable for everyone. And so we ended up expanding it to the entire company. So now everyone has access to a coach. The kind of the guidelines that we give is that all leads and above should meet with their coach every week, and then all of the ICs should meet with them every other week. If there are additional, like, if something comes up or whatever, you're always welcome to reach out to them and things like that. But what I've found is that this has been really, really, really helpful for the company, like really helpful. It gives people an avenue to kind of talk about their stresses, the things that they're having trouble with. It gives people an avenue to talk through like how to do better, how to approach a situation, how to deal with things like healthy confrontation, how to put together a plan for a particular meeting that maybe is coming up that's stressing them out or whatever it is, right? Like the topics kind of range everywhere. And it's also helpful for me kind of at the leadership level to, because I get kind of like a pulse check as well for how things are going. And so, we just did a big project around building out a demo for the fundraising that we're doing, and getting to hear the insight of like the trends across the company of like, oh, people are stressed about this, or actually no, they're really energized, they love the focus about this. It's really helpful for me to kind of get that pulse check, because one of the things I think I've learned that was, I don't always have a great perspective on what's actually going on in the entire organization. I hear what people tell me, but sometimes they tell the CEO a certain version of how things are going,
Yes.
right? And so it's great to be able to have kind of a more honest kind of perspective around what's going on across the company. It's typically anonymized and stuff like that, so we're not kind of like breaking anyone's trust with the coach, but it's great to be able to have that kind of sense of how things are going, and then to also, like, I can work with the coach about like the messages I want the team to hear and the direction I want them to go as well, and they can kind of echo that throughout the organization as well. So in many ways, they kind of act in some ways like an outside HR, if HR played that particular role traditionally. Like in a lot of organizations, they don't. They're really playing more of a logistical role. But learning and organizational growth, is a function of HR. We've just made it a function at the size of 37, not the size of 1,000, because we do believe growth is really important. And what we've seen in terms of results is a great turnaround in things like morale and effectiveness and ability to confront issues and communicate and all that kind of stuff. And they're helpful for me too, right? I've got them. I meet with them every week. And if I've got like a big message I need to tell the whole team or whatever, like I can talk through my thought process with them as well, which is really helpful. In fact, I actually have two coaches, the one that I was just mentioning, and then I've got one who's focused more on like the startup investor side of things, because he's got a lot more experience in that area. And I also have a therapist that I see. So I like to joke that I've got a staff of people supporting me and helping me out with various kind of like growth and stuff like that. I think that's really important. I think that everyone needs that kind of growth and support and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you're very well equipped then, because on my journey as well, coaching over game founders, leaders, it's such a hard role to face all the challenges and questions alone.
Yeah.
You're becoming your own limitation at some point,
Yep.
and it's a responsible thing to do, to accompany yourself by experts or people who can help you, like your mirror outside.
Right.
I think it's even good to have someone out of the organization to create that safety, that it's a time for you and not that's going to be used in some performance system or whatsoever, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's so yeah, they've been very helpful. The idea of coaching, I think, for an entire organization, I think, is a very valuable thing, and something that for my peers who are kind of CEOs at other game startups, it's something I mention all the time of like, guys, trust me, this is a really good, powerful, strong thing. I highly recommend it.
Mm. And my very last question, more as a devil's advocate, because it's one I've heard often. It's expensive coaching. And I
Yeah.
believe as well, equipping everyone in an organization, we are 37, who knows, one day 100, coaching, putting more like the analytical hat. How is it worth the investment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I view them as force multipliers, right? That they help everyone work more effectively. And so the investment in, should ultimately lead to a multiplication of effectiveness, performance, whatever it is that you're trying to measure
Mhm.
across the entire organization. And that's the reason why you institute leads or producers or HR, but whatever other function. Like, it's the same thought process of like, oh, if you put this person in, you can help everyone else be much more effective. And so I actually believe that it actually is a very cost effective way to improve the effectiveness for everyone. I had this one like anecdote that I had heard years ago, I think, and this isn't meant to disparage CFOs. It's just kind of like a funny little joke. Actually, I love our CFO, but the kind of anecdote is a conversation between a CEO and a CFO, and they're talking about the cost of coaching and the cost of training people, right? And the CFO says something like, oh, well, what would happen if we pay for all this training and then the employee leaves? And then the CEO responds saying, I'm more afraid of what would happen if we don't train our employees and they stay. right? And like that's kind of I think a really interesting perspective of like people we of course we want people to grow, of course we want them to be more effective, right? So then why aren't we putting resources to that? It's obviously we have to be cognizant of things like costs and all that kind of stuff, but if you actually can see a multiplicative improvement across everyone, then especially if you have the right coach, then it can be a very cost effective way to increase your bandwidth across programmers or designers or whatever it is, because you can get better alignment, better clarity, better effectiveness in coordination and that kind of stuff. If you can get all of that, then it actually turns out it's actually a very effective way, a very cost effective way to improve and grow your organization.
And I would not argue against it. I've seen it, experienced it, received coaching, and it's thinking long term, right? But it's not measurable in the moment when you evaluate it like this. That's why it's very meaningful for you to share. And I really look forward to seeing your game when it's out. We will follow it. Once you have a link, I'll share it in the show notes. So I'm very curious about that. Thanks a lot, Matt, for sharing, all your practices, leading the charge, the initiative of creating the workplace of the future. And I hope it will inspire others to not only think about it, but know how to do it by getting in touch with you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. I am growing a community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. If you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders, because we have so much more we can learn from each other. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate the show on Spotify or your other favorite podcast platform. It will help other growing leaders to discover the show and benefit from the valuable insights. If you would like to grow rapidly your leadership skills, you can find more insights on riseandplay.io, where you will also find my free masterclass on conscious leadership and other resources that I offer. Have a great week, and remember to take care of yourself. Until the next time.